This month we crack open a biography that reads like a seance. A man steps forward from the mist of England's paranormal past, equal parts scientist, showman, and skeptic. His name? Harry Price. If you've ever heard of the infamous Borley Rectory or read about psychic mediums being tested under laboratory conditions, it's likely Price had something to do with it. But who was this man who made a name for himself, chasing shadows and calling spirits to account? Our guide through this strange and storied life is Hungarian author Paul Tabori, whose Harry Price, the biography of a ghost hunter, takes us beyond the headlines and into the life of a man who walked the fine line between belief and deception. Who was Paul Tabori? Paul Tabori may not be a household name today, but he was a sharp mind with a flair for the esoteric. Born in Budapest in 1908, Tabori was a journalist, historian, and psychologist who fled the rise of fascism in Europe and settled in Britain. There, he cultivated a keen interest in the psychology of belief and the strangeness that lurks at the edge of reason. Tabori was no stranger to the uncanny. His writings touched on censorship, totalitarianism, psychology, and yes, the occult. When he turned his attention to Harry Price, he had something rare: access to Price's personal archives and papers entrusted to him by the Harry Price Library of Magical Literature. The result is a biography that just doesn't recount the facts, it sifts through them, weighs them, and presents Price not as a hero or villain, but as a man caught between two worlds, the empirical and the ethereal. Born in 1881, Harry Price came of age during the heyday of Victorian spiritualism, but where others were content to sit in a darkened room and wait for the spirits to speak, Price wanted proof. He founded the National Laboratory of Psychical Research and later worked with that society in attempts to bring scientific scrutiny to supernatural claims. His tools: cameras, sealed envelopes, fingerprinting kits, and a sharp eye for trickery. Price investigated mediums, hauntings, and mysterious phenomena with a blend of theatrical flair and scientific rigor. One of his most famous cases was the Borley Rectory, the so-called most haunted house in England. His meticulous documentation and dramatic press releases turned the case into a media sensation. Then there was the famous or infamous Rosalie seance, in which a ghost supposedly materialized before Price's very eyes. Skeptics howled, believers nodded, and Price, he stood right in the middle, enjoying the chaos he had conjured. Tabori doesn't shy away from the controversies. He details Price's disputes with fellow researchers, his tendency to self-promote, and the blurred lines between experiment and spectacle. But he also shows us a man who was deeply committed to his work, sometimes to the point of obsession. What makes Tabori's biography so compelling is its balance. It doesn't try to exonerate Price or crucify him. Instead, it shows us the messy, fascinating truth of a man who was both seeker and a showman. Price wasn't a fraud in the traditional sense. He exposed more hoaxes than he ever promoted, but he understood the power of performance, how the trappings of science could lend credibility to the incredible. And in doing so, he laid the foundation for modern paranormal investigation, media savvy, and full of ambiguity. Tabori also offers a subtle commentary on belief itself, how easily we're drawn in by the promise of proof, and how murky things become when we chase the truth in the dark. So who was Harry Price? A ghost hunter? Certainly. A publicity hound? Sometimes. But also a pioneer, an early explorer of that strange terrain where psychology, science, and the supernatural collide. Thanks to Paul Tabori's thoughtful, well-researched biography, we don't just meet the man behind the myth, we begin to understand the forces that shaped him. and why his work still casts a long shadow over the world of paranormal research today. Harry Price, the biography of a ghost hunter, is not just a story about ghosts, it's a story about us, our need to believe, our hunger for answers, and the fine line between truth and illusion. Before we close this episode, let's turn briefly to the modern shelf of the library, a book that echoes with ancient hunger and a voice that is utterly its own. The Lamb by Lucy Rose is a folk tale, a horror story, a love story, and an enchantment. It follows young Margot and her mother Mama as they live in quiet isolation by the forest edge, welcoming strays into their home. But this isn't kindness, it's ritual. Mama feeds them wine, keeps them warm, and then feeds herself in a far darker way. When a beautiful snowbound stranger named Eden arrives, the fragile rhythm of their life unravels. What unfolds is a gothic coming of age tale drenched in blood, longing, and the savage, simmering power of women's anger and appetite. Lucy Rose's debut is one of the most arresting modern occult books I've read in years. Though lengthy, it never drags. The language is lush and feral. The emotional stakes relentless. Rose doesn't just write a story, she casts a spell. This is a novel that aches with mythic weight and psychological truth. The Lamb is for readers who want their darkness poetic, their horror beautiful, and their folklore laced with fury. That wraps up this month's Library of the Occult. As always, I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and I hope you enjoy my thoughts on Harry Price, the biography of a ghost hunter by Paul Tabori, and my little mini review of The Lamb by Lucy Rose. Until next time, goodbye.